live from New York. Happy 4th of July weekend, everyone. It's a big, big experience. We're going to be celebrating Independence Day, tomorrow, and we're in for the long weekend. This is day one, for me, since I had the day off, today, and just, preparing, everything for tonight. And so, welcome. Those of you out there, we'll wait for an audience to develop to see how things are going. We have a full program this evening. And from the title of, the program, we're going to be discussing alien encounters, UFO, Roswell, many other experiences of the extraterrestrial kind. So the whole show will be based on that, from some famous experiences we've known about for many, many years, of course, especially Roswell, but also several others that are well known, as well, and a few other interesting items, too. I'll be discussing about my visit to Roswell last year. And thank you, Valerie. Happy 4th of July to you. And I'll be telling you about my impressions, what I discovered there, what I studied and researched when I was there. Most interesting, most intriguing. It just opens up for more questions as to why these things occur. And I'll be telling you about a few other experiences, incidents that I have had in the past or may have had in the past relating to tonight's topic. So it'll be very fascinating, to hear. Also, I have a few other additional things to show you as well. We'll be talking about interesting people that relate very well with this subject matter. Some that you may recognize, some that may be new, to you. But they're very well-known researchers, UFOologists, that have been studying this phenomenon for many, many years. So I'll give you information on them and where you can locate them also through the internet. The World Wide Web is everything. We can learn so much, obviously, as we've seen in the past 20 years or more. And so far I see I have one person that says hello and waiting for more. So we began on time, luckily. I did a brief commercial test beforehand just to alert people and also just to test out, things, and then went off and then came on again. As usual, the audio portion seems to work the second time I go into live. Rarely, if ever, has it been the first time. So this time I outwitted the system and started a little earlier and then came back to start at 8 p.m. And it looks like so far you can hear me. At least the one or two people that, are seeing me so far. I think you're all stunned that I actually started on time for a change. So, obviously, Valerie, you're not telling me that you cannot understand me, so that's a very, very good sign. And we'll wait, for more people to join us. It is, after all, the 4th of July weekend. So many people may be doing other things tonight or so, whatever. Wonderful to them. But let's see. It is a bit overcast here in New York City. We already had some rain earlier and a bit of thunder. I see, as well that we're around the 86-degree level, and it's been pretty humid, also for most of today. So that gives conditions, for a lot of precipitation and a lot of rain, to come down. I understand it should be happening later on this evening or tonight or overnight. So we will see. Thank you, Valerie. And I'm very happy too, finally. I know it's a miracle, isn't it? So I am very, very happy. So as I look out the window, I see there's some light still, but it's very cloudy and hazy. We're also expecting the gigantic Godzilla Sahara dust cloud to come up, towards the northeast. So that already I understand was occurring or in Puerto Rico. It did obscure the sky there for a while. Also throughout Florida, I understand too that they experienced some of that dust cloud, formation, and the southern portion of the United States. It is then supposed to travel northward, northeast. So I expect that pretty soon, if not already, that may be occurring. As I look out the window once again, I see it's kind of hazy outside, and looks like indications that that dust cloud may have arrived or is arriving at this time period. So we'll monitor that situation, as well. Anything to do with the sky, I just love it. And anything that does with the heavens, there I am. So we're waiting for that. So it's going to be a bit of a hazy night. And yes, Valerie, thank you. Oh, really? Oh, wow, really? It's that heavy. Fascinating. Well, perhaps it'll be heading over here. Um, because I know you live a little farther out than I do. So you may be experiencing it first since you do live closer to the Atlantic Ocean. At least I'm assuming that you do. I'm more inland. So we will see as that moves across in the next hour, hour and a half or so that we'll be here. It is going to be a big program tonight. So we have lots to talk about. And this is a subject that I have been interested in since I was a child. And it's just something that drew my attention always. I just related to it just beautifully. And with the advent of the World Wide Web, the internet, for the past 25 years, there's so much information is out there on the subject of extraterrestrial experience, abduction, unidentified flying objects, flying saucers, first contact, second, third, fourth contact, the government, the military, secrets. I mean, there's so much out there now more than ever before. You can become your own expert, with this subject. And let me see. So I've learned a tremendous amount for many years before through books, obviously, and research, and, documentaries that came up on television from time to time. As we moved into more the 21st century and more of an opening of acceptance towards these subjects, we see that there are many more documentary series, devoted to this subject matter and material. Just recently we had Project Blue Book, it was beginning, I think, in January of earlier this year, and that went into a second season already, and it was based on real life events that happened, with Dr. Alan J. Hynek, who is the leading UFOologist or UFO researcher of the 1950s. And he was recruited by government to be of assistance with either proving or disproving, especially disproving, as he tells it. But nevertheless, this is a subject that's been going on for quite some time. The show, again, was a drama series after all, so not everything was 100% real. But the actual events that they did present were based on fact. So they just broadened it, with a lot more, let's say, creative license, as entertainment likes to use that term so well. But the actual experiences that they depicted were factual and true. And you can read about all of those, again, through the internet resources, many, many websites dedicated to these things. I'll mention a number of them throughout the evening for you. And, books, as always, books that were written 30, 40 years ago, but are still just as relevant as they were then. In fact, even now, more than ever, as we're learning more and more is being revealed. Not just by, people who have had experiences, but actually by the government itself. As we've all seen in the news in the past at this point, almost 3 years, since they finally, admitted and revealed that indeed there was such a program, that the government was putting in millions of dollars towards finding out about unidentified flying objects or unidentified or UAF, apparently, unidentified aerial, objects or so that, they had no explanation for. So with the government opening up, revealing more and more, because they have to, the act came in that they had to reveal certain things. Fascinating. It gave a lot of people who have been a part of this, of the UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon, who have worked at it for years, researchers, people who have had the experience or so, people, lecturers or so, it gave them finally some credence, something to stand on finally, that they weren't just doing this because they were a bunch of crackpots, or it was just a big joke, but there's actually something concrete and real there, or else the U.S. government would not have been devoting over $20 million or more on programs and for decades to see what is going on, or at least purportedly what they say, that they're doing it just to discover what is going on or searching for answers. The UFO phenomenon, of course, is not just singular to the United States of America. Many people throughout the world, many devotees, many researchers, scientists throughout many different countries have also been investigating and finding out about this incredibly mysterious yet wondrous phenomenon for decades, as well. And they have incredible experiences and stories also to tell. I see we're building more of an audience, so we'll just continue. But I'm just giving you a nice introduction of what to expect for this evening. And hopefully you'll find the subject fascinating, intriguing. You'll learn something. Maybe you'll want to find out more on your own. That's what a lot of this program is all about anyway, to cause you to open your minds, to ask questions, to speculate, to change your perspective a bit. Just open. You may be a complete skeptic. You may not believe in any of this at all. But no matter what, it is interesting. No matter what. Whether you consider it science fiction, whether you consider it mental illness, whether you consider it something of a fantasy. But one thing is for sure, it's never boring. And it's always interesting. Hello, Brenda. How are you? Thank you for joining me this evening. And yes, I have heard of the Montauk Experiments and the Philadelphia Project, for sure. And there's a lot of information, a lot of material on this particular subject matter. And the Montauk Experiments are definitely one of the prime experiences that occurred here in the United States back in the 1940s or so. And of course, out in the tip of Long Island at Montauk, there. And Camp Hero, the Air Force base that operated there for quite some time. And the alleged experiments that occurred, there. And of course, the Philadelphia Project, also with its incredible time travel, experiments, where they sent people apparently back in time or ahead of time, or they were able to form what we now call wormholes in some shape or form, where some of the military were able to travel, through time and back. So yes, I am very well informed about those subjects. They relate also, of course, with the unidentified, aerial phenomenon or experience or so also, because there were things like that associated with those experiments, as well. So thank you so much for bringing that up. We can, go into that a little bit more. There's so much to talk about in regards to this subject. My goodness, we could spend a whole week, discussing this, or at least I could spend an entire month doing programs about this particular experience. Again, there are many fascinating people that have devoted their lives and their careers to researching, investigating, exploring about the subject matter. It goes all the way back to ancient civilizations and time periods as well. If you've been watching, different series on the networks, A&E, Discovery, National Geographic, Destination America, the Travel Channel, for years now, they have been providing many different shows, series, documentaries on all this type of subject and material. Going back to ancient times as well, there's evidence, even as far back as Egypt, with depictions that were placed, on the hieroglyphics that indicates that these people may have had connections with those, from the heavens, from those from other worlds during those time periods. And for some reason, it disappeared, it vanished, from our existence. But who knows if they have really vanished after all. They've just been quiet, and who knows who's been connecting with them and who has not, and who dares not to say anything or has been told or asked not to say anything. This is a very mysterious, subject matter indeed. But we have, depictions going back certainly to Egyptian times, to Mesoamerica, to the time of the Maya, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, South America also has a major, major, major history with the unidentified flying objects, with extraterrestrial phenomenon as well. In fact, in some ways, they've been more advanced than we have been here. And it's people all over Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, and the rest of the countries throughout South America have seen incredible things, have experienced amazing, you know, circumstances that have come, beings, lights, craft flying at all hours. They have incredible video, of these things occurring even in broad daylight. Many of you may have seen a lot of these things depicted, on the shows that I just mentioned, on the networks that I just mentioned. So in a way, they are more advanced in some ways, with this material. They have been more open to it, more accepting, of that in their societies. Here in the United States, they are starting now, more than ever before, to open and broaden the scope of interest, intrigue, and acceptance about this subject and its material. We have a history of this going back to this country for over a century. This is nothing new. It didn't come up in the last 50 years, like many people may think. We've had, events depicted even far back into the 19th century. There were people saying that, they had seen objects, lights in the sky. It was written in their newspapers, whether it was a local small town to a major bigger city. But it has been written about, as far as I'm aware, back in the 19th century and even before. This is nothing new. A resurgence of that interest actually started appearing more in the late 1940s. And certainly we are very aware that the 1950s was inundated with many things pertaining to flying saucers, people from other worlds, aliens, little green men, from all over. As you see, I have my friend with me, right here with me, my little green friend from Roswell, who came with me, and he's here this evening, to just present himself and to, in a way, just co-host with me this evening about this incredible experience, because so many people were talking about the little green men at the beginning, the little green men from Mars, which became, something for children to be fascinated with. And that has certainly stuck in our culture and our society, ever since. It is truly a cultural phenomenon. So, we're just waiting for more people to join us this evening before I plunge more deeply into the subject and present what I have. This evening will be fascinating. And so let's see what else comes up. So, as I was talking, the late 1940s, of course, certainly there was an interest, because it was around the first period of time where objects from the sky, from another world, seemed to be making themselves more known, more visible, to people, to the world, for whatever reasons. With this is always a mystery. So that's what piqued people's curiosity and was being talked about all over the media as well. We went into the 1950s. It was a craze for things science fiction and monsters and again, and aliens or so, and things from other worlds. And even Hollywood got into it, and a lot of the famous, movies of that era also delved a lot with this type of subject matter, also, and stuck into, the United States, consciousness, at that time. Things start to wane for a bit around the 60s or so. So much happened, obviously, in the 1960s. It was a great time of change, for the United States and as well as for the world. It was a pivotal point in world history and in, let's just say, this era's society, because the 50s and the 60s especially was the point where things really changed. It was a true revolution. It was like what the vestiges of the 19th century were finally being left behind. They were finally on their way out. And the 20th century really started to flourish. And a new way of thinking, a new way of being, freedom, in a way, was coming into play. Advances technologically also were more apparent at that time. We got away from a lot of stuff that still clung to the first half of the 20th century. And we started really moving more into the 20th century completely. And then from there, some good things happened, a lot of negative things happened, as we know, from that era. It truly was a time of revolution, not just in America, but throughout the world, also. It was just a time for evolution to happen on the earth and to move up to the next level. And it certainly did. The 70s were fascinating because the early 70s started bringing, once again, more of an interest in this type of subject matter. Once the 60s passed and the upheavals that were so significant at that time started to pass and people were recovering, the Vietnam War finally came to a conclusion in the early 70s also. So people's minds could come back to more mundane, more regular, things. Not all the excitement, the chaos, and the commotion that occurred during the 60s, all that revolution that occurred. So one thing that did happen was found out more was that people were becoming more drawn once again to things of the psychic. ESP, extrasensory perception, became a more well-known term for psychic activity, for psychic phenomenon, for psychic abilities. That was the term that was coined, at that time. Books were surfacing on the subject. In a way, the pre-dawn of the New Age movement started, happening around that time. And we had things such as EST, appear, and people were going into communes, which really started more in the 60s or so, a new age of thinking or so, meditation, practices from India also were being talked about more, yoga, meditation workshops, and things of that nature started, popping up all over, a lot in the West Coast, more certainly in the Eastern Seaboard, but nevertheless, that was in the public mind, also. And along with that came along things such as psychic phenomenon. Also, what came up as well was fascinating things that could not be explained, such as the Bermuda Triangle, for instance, Edgar Cayce, Atlantis, discoveries of that nature, of that form, also started to be talked about more. There were some programs that were being devoted to this type of interest, at that time period. So we had one of the first programs, which was In Search Of, which was hosted by Leonard Nimoy, formerly Captain Spock or Lieutenant Spock of Star Trek. So he was always a person who was very fascinated by all this subject matter. And he hosted, In Search Of. And they touched upon a lot of these fascinating subjects in the early to mid 70s. So that was an interesting time. It was a view of finding out flying saucers. So we saw things a lot at that time in the National Enquirer, the Star, the Globe, the Examiner, if it was around at that time, those newspapers, which at that time were a little bit more credible than they are now. But they presented a lot of material, on UFO, on psychics. And this is how we found out about a lot of these people, actually, like famous psychics of that era, such as Jean Dixon, Kenny Kingston, Char Margolis, when she was just starting out, also, then, as well. Psychics like Peter Hergos, also who were very prominent in the 60s and 70s. And they wrote a lot about them. Edgar Cayce certainly was featured a great deal, also there. Sabrina Kincaid, who was another psychic of the 70s or so, there, that they were well known. And they would feature these people. Sidney Omar and his astrology report was also a popular, person and subject that they featured at that time period. Of course, Walter Mercado, the famous Puerto Rican astrologer, had his, #1 program, going on in Puerto Rico during the 70s, every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Every Spanish household used to be tuned in to Channel 41 or Channel 47, I forgot which one it was, whether here in the United States or in Puerto Rico, to tune into Walter Mercado's weekly astrology forecast. It was very, very, very popular. He was very, very well known. Walter just passed away last year, unfortunately, but he had a very long and successful career and life. And he was one among the first people who made this type of subject popular, well known. So, we had that in the 70s. Then in the mid 70s, it kind of died down again a bit or so. Other things took prominence or so. There was always some mention of it here and there, but not to the same degree as it had been previously. Then, around the mid 90s or so, when things started to happen again, like never before. For some reason, people started talking about these subjects once again: psychic phenomenon, UFO, extraterrestrial, strange creatures, Bigfoot, which was also popular back in the 70s as well. Also Sasquatch, which was also written about a great deal also. So that started surfacing more and more back in the mid 90s. And that's when the term New Age started coming more into being as well. And more people seem to be opening up to psychics, to mediumship, like it seemed never before. They were talking about it more. The media started focusing in on that interest. And then we had people that, the new crop of psychics, even though some of them may have been working for a long, long time, that became better known also. And I've talked about this in the past in other programs as well. But we had people such as Sylvia Brown, John Edward, Rosemary Altea, James Van Prague, starting to surface, to become better known. And they were constantly on television. Some of them got their own programs. Sylvia was on Montel Williams' talk show all the time. For 17 years, she was the number one guest. They were very good friends, and she was on frequently. John Edward got his own show for several seasons. James Van Prague also had his show. We had George Anderson, also in Long Island, who also had his program through cable, in Long Island. Or so, doing a program as well. He became very, very well known, especially in the mid-90s or so. And we've always on that Long Island has always been very progressive when it comes to the New Age, to psychics, to mediums, to the study of New Age, of wellness, holisticness, crystals, stones, Reiki. There are numerous, numerous amounts of people throughout the Long Island area that practice, that develop, that are well known. Also John Edward, James Van Prague, George Anderson being three of the most, famous psychics in the world, and all of them originally from Long Island. So isn't that something? For some reason, Long Island is saturated in some sort of spiritual, supernatural energy. And it brings people out, and people are drawn to this. And I've worked a lot, in Long Island throughout my career and throughout the years. A lot of my work has always been based in Long Island because people have been more open and more progressive to these subjects, out there, more so than here in New York City. New York City, as big as it is, you'd think they'd be more open to these things, and they are to a great extent. There are many wonderful, very gifted psychics in New York City. I've worked among several of them. I was working at a bookstore for 6 years until the pandemic hit, and we had to bring that to an end for the time being. I hope that once things subside and they can open up more fully, hopefully I can return, because I love doing my once a week sessions there. And I met wonderful psychics who work there and throughout New York City, and they're fabulously gifted. But there's so much in New York City, so many other interests, that there's just not enough for them to focus on one thing. There's too much going on. So you don't see such a boom of psychic interest in the Manhattan, New York City area as you do out in Long Island. Different topography, different experience. They're more open. Whatever else is out there that draws this type of thing or so, but it is, more situated there. That, and of course, up in Lilydale, in upper western New York State. Lilydale, for many of you who know this, you know what I'm talking about. For those who don't, it is the psychic capital of New York State. And there are many practitioners, mediums, that live in this town since the past over 100 years or so or more. It is well known and well regarded for that. It's about, I think, an hour or 2 hours from Buffalo, New York. So it's way up there. I've had several friends that have been up there. They've worked up there and they've studied, also there. Eventually one day I hope to finally get there myself. I know a few people that live there, also that connect through Facebook or so. Fabulous practitioners, glorious. They're all excellent, among the world's finest psychic mediums and practitioners. And they do classes, lectures or so. And it's a glorious place. It's filled with magical energy. Supernatural, forces definitely are there. Many people in the public go to visit, to have readings there. They can even stay a week or so or more. There are hotels there, places to stay, where you can attend classes, do workshops, week-long events or so. In the summer, usually they have a lot of events happening. Unfortunately, this year, due to the pandemic, they've had to bring that to a close. But the mediums are still working out there. I'm sure they're doing their Zoom and their telephone readings or so. So they're still active and they do what they can, as we all are doing here at this time. So at this point, it's 8:30, so I'm going to get more into the program itself. So as I was saying, just to come to a conclusion to this, which leads us into our program this evening, in the mid-90s, was more of an opening to all of these subjects. I myself had always been, I had abilities all my life. I had worked from time to time, this and that, but for me too, and I've mentioned this before on program, that I started to open up more as well to my psychic abilities and gifts. Something came around me that I needed to learn. I wanted to find out more. It was this incredible craving that came over me to read. I bought numerous books, studied, connected with people, luckily, who do these things. I learned a great deal from all of them. And I developed even more. So by 2000, early 2000s, I was able to start practicing professionally and have been doing that ever since. And along with this practice has always been my interest in extraterrestrial, UFO, other worlds, other civilizations. Have we been visited? Is it just a figment of our imagination? Is there more to this? And I've always had a major part of my life involved, with this material, because it all works together. At least for me, it all works together. So here we are in 2020, and people are opening up more and more. We're finding out more about these things. More and more people are no longer afraid to talk about their experiences as well, which is a good thing, which is why there's been so much more happening in the media, among people, society. People are talking. They are not afraid anymore about what experiences they have had seeing craft, unidentified flying craft, at night, during the day, whatever. They've had connections. They've had contact with otherworldly beings in many different forms, in different ways. People from many different ages, as babies, as small children, as adults, people who are open to this, people who were completely skeptical to all of this whatsoever, until the day came that they had an experience and completely changed their view and their perspective on this. And I'm now absolutely 100% sure that there are those from other worlds that are here, that have come to visit us, that are among us even. And incredible stories, incredible experiences. So it leads us to now. So for tonight, we're going to celebrate also the 73rd anniversary of the Roswell flying saucer crash. It is usually celebrated around the first week or so of July. So a little bit of history on that. Right now, we have the annual UFO Roswell Festival taking place in New Mexico, where the flying craft, crashed back in 1947. Usually they have a major event. They have over, God knows, 20,000 people or 200,000 people come into town once a year. This is their major event. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus pandemic, they had to cancel this year's Roswell UFO celebration. So we can't have thousands of people, throughout town attending lectures, events, etc. Speakers coming from all over the world. They just weren't able to do that, as so much has been canceled this year. But what they are doing, nevertheless, is that the shops that are out there, the museums or so that are devoted to this type of subject, because this is their number one way of receiving commerce. They are putting out, tents, outside of their businesses or so. They are selling items or so. They're selling things such as, or they're providing their famous official passport, for Roswell weekend. I happen to be lucky that I was given this passport, as you can see here, about a year ago or so from a friend of mine. This did not come from when I went to Roswell, because when I went last year was in June of 2019. This is only given during the Roswell Festival. But however, my friend did have a person that she knew who went in 2018 to the festival, and he attained several of these passports, and she was very lovely because she knew that I have a very big interest in this subject to gift me with this passport from the Roswell Festival. So this is a treasured keepsake, right here. So it was a surprise to me. It's a surprise for you to see this. Actually, they do give out passports. And what they do, we'll open it briefly, is just depicting, what they have to offer there. From the sponsors, what they do there in Roswell, if you can see that or not. Trying to get into the camera. Here for you, and it's a little hard to see. Trying to put it more even. But they tell about, what's there. The events that are happening throughout Roswell, UFO weekend celebration, what times. They have numerous workshops, numerous speakers. Throughout the entire 3-day event. Actually lasts a week, but the main days are Friday, Saturday, and Sundays, usually. First weekend of July, always. And you can see a bit more here. Here's the museum, what they do there or so. You can get these things stamped when you go to these places, like a real passport. That's why they have a lot of blank spaces, there. Also, so you can get stamped as you attend. And go to these, you get autographs in here from the famous speakers that attend. So it's a lot of fun, I understand. One day I hope to go, to that actual event. If I can find a hotel at that time, because God knows it gets crowded over there. You know how things are. But anyway, so they celebrate this weekend, the beginning of July, first weekend, because this week is when news got out in the media that there was a flying saucer that crashed in New Mexico near the town of Roswell. So the Roswell National Newspaper Examiner, there, which is still in existence, and I happen to have seen, the building there. They've been publishing for God knows over close to 100 years or more. At this point, Roswell goes back a long, long way. It's a very small town right down there in New Mexico, and they published that indeed a craft of some sort crashed, and was reported by the government also, that kind of admitted at that moment that they did find some items there or so that seemed to be not from this world. So that was reported this week, first week of July. However, during my research, which I've been doing for many years, on this subject matter, I learned that actually how the true event occurred was that it was in mid-June when a rancher out near the crash site and his family, one evening, saw some mysterious lights, in the sky, and that something just seemed to hurtle down, from the heavens. And there was a big storm prior to that evening, back in 1947, lightning storm. Because over there, it's so open and so vast, so much land, that it's prone, to lightning storms. They're prone to hurricanes, over there as well, and tornadoes. In fact, when Mother and I were there last year, on the first day that we arrived, there was a tornado warning not too far. The weather wasn't that good when we got there at first, and there was a tornado warning in Texas, which is not that far, actually, from the border of New Mexico. So there was a little bit of turbulence in the atmosphere, there at that time, so they're prone to incredible weather, such as tornadoes, etc. there. So, such an event was happening back in 1947, thunder, lightning storm, very violent storm. So I do believe that one of the rancher's children, or two, happened to see or spy something in the heavens, like these incredible lights that were there, and then that one seemed to come crashing down, from the sky, a few miles from where their ranch, was, and then it crashed into the land. And the next day, I do believe the son of the rancher or so, and this is the rancher, legendary rancher Max Brazel, who was one of the first people to see evidence of the UFO crash, because not too far from his land, there. So they went out to the land a bit, and they discovered some things that looked like pieces of aluminum strewn throughout a lot of the area, and other strange and unusual items. And they questioned, what is this? And they picked it up. It's just like aluminum foil, but when you bend it, it folds back to normal. No signs of creases, nothing. Material like they have never seen before, and other things. So they found this rather odd and mysterious. And there was some other evidence of some other things going on over there too. So I'm condensing this a great deal because it just gets very detailed. We could go the whole night with this and forget it, So at that point, Max went back, to the ranch, and they called the police to report that something apparently had crashed, from the sky, and it was near their land or so, and they wanted to find out more. So obviously the police came by or whatever, and then immediately the government made its presence known. And apparently the government had made its presence known there quite before. I think even Max Brazel and his family, realized, what was going on. And from there, the government came in and took over, commandeered that area or so, started doing investigations, started doing a lot of recovery. And that's when things started happening where it appeared that a saucer had crashed from the sky, which was not of this world. Debris was all over. And that there were 4 bodies of beings that were not of this world that were found. At least 3 were dead, unfortunately. 1 was still alive. And the government, in the shadow of the night, recovered all this material, or so. Max and his family got, somehow they saw certain things and put 2 and 2 together or more. You can find out a lot more about this over the internet or so. But the night of June 14th, 1947, was when this occurred, near Roswell. So the actual, craft did, crash the evening between June 14th to June 15th. There are also reports saying there was more than 1 craft in the sky, and that what appeared apparently was that there was a collision between 2 of them because of lightning that struck. And 1 craft was able to escape, but the other one unfortunately crash landed at an incredible velocity. So when this saucer did fall, it fell in 3 different places or 3 different stages. So apparently where the Brazel Ranch was located was stage 1. It's because of the incredible 300 miles of speed that it came down. It literally came down once, then bounced, then came down a second time and bounced again because of the velocity was so incredible, and finally crash landed at its 3rd and final destination near Lincoln, New Mexico, which is about 36 miles off of Roswell. So, but still it's the general area, there. So there were 3 crash points, there. So near Lincoln is where the actual saucer, laid to rest. And they were certainly out there, the government, and retrieving this quickly. And then from there, Max Brazel was visited by the government or so, and he was, they just interviewed them, interrogated them or so, and then they were asked quite firmly not to say a word and to keep quiet about this. Nevertheless, news got out at the beginning that, that this occurred. It came out in the Roswell Examiner, I think July 8th is when it was reported, and that became a national phenomenon. The article was there. It blew up into the news, incredibly, not just through the United States, but throughout the whole world. Lots of people were frightened and intrigued by all of this or so. And hello, Raymana. Thank you for joining us this evening. And so, from at first being kind of open about this and discovering this, and a few days later, the very next day, the government issued a statement stating about What really crashed was an air balloon, and the materials that were captured and the pictures that were then released to the news and to the newspaper, you know, varied from the original reporting. It said it was just a weather balloon that crashed, and that's the aluminum material that was found. And there was nothing, no flying saucer, no little aliens, came down from the sky. There's nothing to the extraterrestrial, other people from other worlds coming to invade our planet. It was just the military and an unfortunate accident. And then they had, pictures, of the material, put in the newspaper. And there was, what is it, Major or Jesse Marcel, there, who became famous for his picture holding, the material, the aluminum foil-like material there that they took pictures of to show to the world that indeed, this is, just the remnants of a weather balloon the military uses or so. And they tried to diffuse, the information as quickly as possible. They took everything with them. It was taken to, at that point, the Air Force Base in Roswell. They put it in the famous hangar, there as well, the flying saucer, the other material, the bodies, of the aliens. Everything was stored there for a period of time, quickly, just to get it out of the way. So that hangar became famous, as which I got to see as well last year, also. It's still there. And from there, then materials, as we found out later on, were distributed to different military installations, throughout the country. Part of it went to Nevada, and we know that in Nevada there's the now famous Area 51. So they have the government secret base, or not so secret base, obviously, anymore, there. So part of the material went there. Other material went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as well. So I do believe that some of the bodies, were placed, over there. And more material. And another Air Force Base further up also received other, remnants of the crash or so. So the government, just put an immediate close to that. And that was it. But that's when all the intrigue, began. Because there was evidence of things. People throughout Roswell saw when things happened, saw the military come in, went out and see. They saw material. People that were working there, who were working with the government to retrieve, items there, saw things, but they were all firmly and were all intimidated into being silent by the government. They were intimidated to such an extent that they threatened their lives as well as their family lives as well, not to say anything ever. Going back to the 1940s, it was a different time period. People were different. People were easily intimidated, especially by the government. So when you were told something like that, you kept quiet. They frightened people into silence. And they were successful for a long time. There were a few that would say something here and there amongst themselves or to their families or whatever. The media would capture whatever, but they never really put much credence, into it. And the government was always there to put their stamp, on it. So they intimidated and frightened people for decades. And then decades later, people, once they got older, once they were no longer afraid, we hear about the deathbed confessions of many people in the military talking about what occurred, those who were there, those who talked about it, and say that indeed it was a craft from another world that came to this world and crashed. They saw the bodies, they saw the evidence, but they didn't dare say anything because they were under government rule, but now they were retired. Some of them were very, very old and dying literally under deathbed confessions. Then they decided to talk. So with that, and these were people that were very respected in the government. And I put a video on my Facebook page earlier this week on Colonel Phil Corso, who was one of the people who was there and investigated the Roswell experience when it happened. And he admitted many years later, finally, back in the 1990s, he was already, 82 or so, and he spoke with Art Bell, on Art's famous program, Coast to Coast, at that time about the phenomena. So he admitted it finally. He was retired for years. His oath, of allegiance to those who asked him to keep silent, those people had died or had passed away. So he felt at liberty to be able to speak about this. Finally, he wrote a book on the subject, as well, just to leave a legacy, to not leave it in silence. He wanted people to know that this indeed occurred. So you have people with that type of experience, that type of respect, who work closely with government, and with the president at that time period. These are people to be taken seriously. They are not crackpots. They didn't lose their mind. He wasn't 82 years old and going senile or had Alzheimer's disease. His mind was as sharp as a tack, as sharp as it was when he was 21. So these are people that are respected, are credible, and they're speaking. And many more, obviously, in the military and those who are close, working there. Finally talking, finally revealing. People who lived in the Roswell area also were talking, finally, and revealing the truth, and saying what they saw, saying what their family members who saw or worked there, told them. They were no longer afraid. They were no longer intimidated by the government to keep silent. They were no longer afraid of their lives being taken by revealing the secrets of Roswell. And more of that has come out. We've had investigators come in there, among them legendary UFOologist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman, who was one of the first civilian investigators to go and to examine the site and the crash there. Stanton Friedman was very, very well known as a nuclear physicist for many years, and he had an interest in this subject matter, and he went and he just trudged in and delved into this. He became a very famous UFO researcher and lecturer for decades, and he wrote several books, on the subject, and he used the scientific method to explore, to investigate this experience. And he was very, very respected and very well known. He just passed away last year at the age of 84, suddenly, of a heart attack. And it was incredible to me for two reasons, because number one, I didn't realize that Stanton Friedman was 84 years old. He was such a vital and dynamic person that he didn't seem to be of that age. And even though already he was 84, but he was still going to lecture and do events or so, even though he technically retired, from, investigating or so, researching years before. But he so loved this work, and he so loved lecturing about it, and he wanted people to know and to be educated about this experience, and not just about the Roswell experience, but other experiences of the extraterrestrial and UFO phenomena having other ways with other people. He also investigated those, as well. He wanted the public to know what was real. So he just kept on going, and he loved it. He was very active. And actually, he was at the airport in Canada where he lived, heading to another lecture that he was going to do. And unfortunately, he was felled by a heart attack. And that was it. And we were all very, very saddened when that occurred, because as it was very sudden. And there I was already planning to go to Roswell the next month. I was not going to meet Stanton there because he was not going to be there, obviously. But he has such a strong connection to that. So that was an impact to me as well, and to many people who had been following him for years, and certainly for the UFO community and those researchers, investigators. It was a big blow to everyone. But he did a lot of work. He contributed tremendously. And he was one of those people that really opened this subject, to the world, and made sure that people knew exactly what was going on, and that more needed to be discovered and needed to be learned, and that the government eventually, in time, will finally open up and finally reveal about this, and disclosure, as it is called, will finally happen. So he was a prominent person. I had the good fortune of meeting him like 11 years ago or so, when he came to do a lecture here in New York City. I used to go to lectures for the Intruders Foundation that was run through the Edgar Cayce Foundation. So once in a while they'd have these types of lectures, and even though they were a very secretive environment and a very, carefully closed organization, because this was for people who had experience with extraterrestrials. And it was people who were undergoing therapy, hypnosis, in order to get to the heart of the matter and see what they could remember about their experience, to help them support. So a group of people who had these types of experiences would get together at the Intruders Foundation to discuss about their experiences, to learn, to find out from one another, to know. It was run by UFO researcher Bud Hopkins, who was another well-respected individual, also on the UFO phenomenon experience. His area was more on the abductee experience, people who reported that they had been abducted by extraterrestrials or have had experiences seeing them or connecting or communicating with them. And he was their principal source of assistance. He never judged anyone. He listened to them. He would counsel them. He learned hypnosis so that he could help to regress people. Because one thing about the UFO experience, or the extraterrestrial experience, is that when people have had these events happen to them in different forms, whether they have run into a UFO, while they were traveling, which happens a lot, at night or so, and they see a craft, or a craft comes toward them or so, and then they're abducted or so, and then they come back to their car hours later, for instance, and there's missing time, as they call it, and they can explain why 3 hours passed, from the moment that they were stopped to see this light or this craft come close to them or come upon them until it left. That is part of the experience. Other people are visited in their homes, usually in the middle of the night, where they have experienced beings coming to them, similar to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's an example that occurred with that film, the famous 1977 film that Steven Spielberg directed and produced. And a lot of that movie actually depicts from real life experience that happened to people. And that's the way it was. And Steven was able to connect, and because he is who he is, he was able to be open and be connected with people who were able to provide that information. He was able to know. So Close Encounters of the Third Kind is actually a film that's based on a lot of fact experiences put together in one film of events that people have experienced and have told about. So what you see there is what has happened to a lot of people throughout the world. So with that, these extraterrestrial beings or phenomenons come through in different ways for people. Daytime, nighttime, whatever. They have the ability to make you forget about the experience, at least to a certain extent. So when you finally are returned or come out of it, you don't really remember a great deal. Or in some cases, you feel that you've had this strange dream, or there's something unsettling that has occurred. You just feel something. Something has happened. You don't know all the details. You don't remember all the details, but something has occurred. The people, the extraterrestrials, or as I call them, outworlders, they are far more advanced. Their technologies are wondrous. Their minds are incredible. They can do and accomplish things we cannot even begin to comprehend. Their minds are vast and incredible. And what they can do, as they have studied or learned about us, is, take us, learn, do their experiments, do whatever they do with us or whatever, return us, but then they blank out our memories. Or so it seems that they blank out our memories. Apparently, you're not able to really erase all information from the mind, or at least certainly they are not able to do it. And that's why we have people, children especially, are more open and more vulnerable to this. So they are more aware. They tend to remember more about these things. Adults may find it harder. It seems like it's a figment of the imagination, or it's a big dream that they had. But then there are things that happen that physically that give reminders or so. There's a change. They suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because of these things. There are markings on their bodies, for instance, or so, that they can't explain, but they know that something occurred. People experience in different levels, in different forms. Some remember more than others. Hypnosis has been a method that has been used to go into the mind, to relax the person from their trauma, to be able to go into their mind and to relive events that occurred safely. And this is where those repressed memories come forth. And then we get the full detail, as much as we can learn from the full detail of these things. This is what happened to Betty and Barney Hill back in the 1960s. I do it in 1961. Now, Betty and Barney Hill were a couple who lived in New Hampshire. And they were a very normal, group of people. I do believe that Barney was a post office worker, and Betty was a social worker in the New Hampshire area. And one night, and let me see, because I have some information, I have some notes here that I've taken just to be accurate and aware of these things. Let's see. So, let's see. So I'm looking to the Betty and Barney Hill section of things here. Let's see. Nope, wrong page. Let me turn around. Let's see. I'll be right with you. I want to give you the most accurate information, obviously, that we can have. Here we go. So Betty and Barney Hill. This occurred actually. Let's see. If I can find that. No. Let's see. This occurred on September 19th of 1961 is when they had their experience. So they were traveling back from vacation. It was late at night. They were traveling home in their car when Betty, noticed some strange and unusual lights in the sky. And then they noticed that these lights started to follow them, and they got closer. So of course they were frightened, and stunned when this occurred. One of the lights became, a spacecraft in front of them and came down and landed before them and shown themselves. Barney got out of the car to see what's going on. They were terrified as well. And then apparently some beings came out, from this craft. And then the next thing they know, they were taken up into the craft. And they were basically abducted. There, they were separated into 2 different rooms or so. Experiments were conducted on each of them. Some of them could be quite painful, but the outworlders, because being as sophisticated and as advanced as they were able to numb their pain just with the powers of their mind. But they do remember, as they were regressed into hypnosis afterward, more of the details that happened, to them during that experience in the course of that evening. So apparently they were in the craft for quite some time. At that point, let me see. Betty was able, once the experimental section of things, came to a conclusion, Betty was given a book by one of the outworlders who was known as the leader, or she called them the leader. And they looked like the typical gray aliens that we've heard so much about. So I went about 3 to 4 feet in height, very slender, the large head, the big dark eyes, a slit for a mouth, really not much of a nose or ears. They talked telepathically, and they could converse, with Betty and with Barney in English as well. So this wasn't just a tale of just abduction and having experiments taken and then just deposited back. They were able to engage with the aliens at that time. And the alien, at least the leader, was pretty open, with Betty about certain, things. Because Betty asked him, once the fear subsided, and she realized where she was or so she started to engage, with the being. And she asked him, where are you from? And the leader told her that they are from the Zeta Reticuli region of the cosmos. And these reticuli are the 2 stars that are millions of miles away, from here. And that their home world is close to this star system. Hence we get, the gray aliens, also known as the Zeta Reticulans, as well. And this really came from that experience. So this is where they came from. This is how they travel. They come to learn about, this society and the way people are here, humans. They do experiments to learn about human biology and functioning. And then the alien was able to show Betty a map of where they came from. and how far, the Earth was from where they come from, and the various constellations of stars, that are there. So there was a star map on the craft that he was able to show her, where this was. He also gave her a book as well that she was supposed to take back with her, from the experience, as well. Whatever information was in there, I really don't know. But let me also show you something you'll find interesting as well. I'll be right back. So, as I was saying, the alien or the outworlder stated to Betty and to Barney that they came from the Zeta Reticuli region of the galaxy, and there was a star map that they had that he showed Betty, there so that she could see what it was. So I was very fortunate when I went to see Stanton Friedman, at his lecture, that he had provided or had brought with him some of the books that he had written in the past, as well as a magazine pamphlet that he also was responsible for called the Zeta Reticuli Incident. And he stated that this had, some story about, the space, craft, what occurred or so there or so, and that there was a copy of the famous star map, because Betty, afterward, once, they came out of this experience or so, she reported, to the government or so that they had had this experience and they had seen this craft, and then military had come to visit them and they relayed their experience to them as part of this methodology, because they went through a hard time after the experience occurred. They had nightmares after the experience. They knew something traumatic had happened to them, but they were at a loss as to what exactly, because a lot of their memory had been wiped of the experience, just to relieve some of the trauma that they underwent. But nevertheless, mind wiping of that sort doesn't really work 100%. So both of them started to have nightmares and flashbacks about the experience and what occurred, to them there, to the point where they were starting to wonder if this was a figment of their imagination or if they were going insane. But then both of them at the same time, they experienced pains and aches and things in their body where they had been experimented upon. So luckily they talked to people who were able to experience this type of thing as well, and they were able to connect with a hypnotherapist through one of the government officials that they had been talking with about this experience, and they were able to undergo hypnosis, with this experience. So that is when more of their memories started becoming unrepressed, and more of the entire experience for both of them started to be revealed through hypnosis. And that's when everything started to come out, from there. So that's where Betty learned or remembered about, the book she was given, about the star map that she was shown. The hypnotherapist asked Betty to draw, an example of that map, which she was able to do, as well, for him. And Betty Hill was not someone who was versed in astronomy or knew much about, certain galaxies or constellations or so. So she drew what she remembered. It was then corroborated, from astronomers and from the military that what she drew indeed was part of the constellation of Zeta Reticuli, and that those stars actually do exist in the positions that she, drew, from her memory of the map. So there we have more evidence, there on that regard. So let me see what else we have here. So they experienced their missing time, the Zeta Reticuli map as well. One of the first people they connected with was Captain, Captain Buell or Captain Bruce Sweat was the first person they connected from the military regarding this experience. So Captain Sweat was very important and integral into assisting them, learn and get this out and to find out more about this experience with them. From Captain Sweat, they were able to connect with Benjamin Simon, the hypnotist, who was able to regress both Betty and Barney and start to reveal more about this experience from those hypnotic sessions. And of course, they were all recorded, as well. And I do believe the internet, there's some places or some sites that you can, actually hear some of these recordings. And there's numerous books written about Betty and Barney Hill, obviously Interrupted Journey, for instance, and several other books that were written about them. They became quite well known here in the United States in the 60s or so on this. They were ridiculed, of course, at the time. A lot of people didn't believe a thing. But at the same time, when the military got involved with this as well, that added some more credence, to their story. So they were, lecturers. They became guests on various, television programs or so from time to time. They became, well known because of this. And they became, UFO experts, because they were among the first in the United States, if not the world, to speak about alien abduction and what occurred to them. So they were very brave at that time, going back into the 1960s. Things of that sort were not spoken about that much, were not well known, and people would think you were crazy when you did speak about that at that extent. And even to this day, there are lots of people who still doubt a great deal about these things or so. But just checking the wall to see who else is out there. Very good. So we had their experience, happen there at that time period. And the book is called The Interrupted Journey. For those of you who are interested, it's from 1966. And you can look up for that book. I will post a link once we're finished, so that way, you can see if you can find that book for yourselves. And you can read up about their story, also, there. So, as I said, Stanton Friedman, had copies of this pamphlet, which included the star map, from Betty and Barney Hill's experience. So, of course, he had one of the last first edition, pamphlets that he was putting on sale there. So I immediately, of course, purchased one from Stanton himself. And he was very gracious and very lovely and very kind. There's a picture of me and Stanton, on the events, for this, for tonight's discussion. Hopefully a lot of you saw it. There I posted some pictures of things pertaining to tonight's, subject, so you could have seen and reviewed. If not, you can look into them afterward. So they are there. So I immediately purchased that from Stanton, and here we are. So for you to see, this is the actual first edition of the Zeta Reticuli incident that Stanton, gave to me, or I purchased from him. He was very gracious. And this is the actual star map that Betty, Hill remembered from seeing on the craft. This is, what she reproduced. Of course, this has, been reproduced, officially with computer graphics, from that time period. But this is the actual constellation that she drew. And it was really, really very faithful to what the actual constellation is. So you can see from here. So this is the Zeta Reticuli constellation. That's where the star is located. And the Outworlder's home planet is within this galaxy and this constellation region. So this is where they come from, from this area in space. So there you have that. And again, this is the Zeta Reticuli incident, pamphlet here. This is a first edition copy. I'm very, very lucky to have it. It's one of my prized possessions. And since Stanton, passed away last year, especially more than ever, I will be keeping this with me always, forever. A treasure, especially coming from him. So I am very, very lucky to have this. And I will also put a link to that, so if you need to, perhaps you can find, this as well, another edition of it or so, whatever. They're out there, if you can even find them anymore, for you to see for yourselves as well. So the Betty and Barney Hill incident really started let's say the second wave of the UFO phenomenon here in the United States. Because from afterward then other people started speaking up, and then other experiences started happening, and then more people started reporting about seeing flying identified craft or seeing aliens or so throughout the entire United States or so. And it started, that type of phenomenon occurring. Going back to the 50s as well, people were talking a bit more, but not as much as this, when this occurred. So that started piquing society's interest in this subject matter and in this material. Then we went to the 1970s, and then we had famous author Whitley Strieber And that's when he wrote his book, Communion. Whitley was the author of many numerous books. He was very respected and well known. And Whitley reported on the night of December 26, 1975, in his cabin in upstate New York, he received a visitation from people or from beings from other worlds. He saw the lights, he looked out to the sky, there was craft flying around. Prior to this, he had never had any experience of this kind. It just happened out of nowhere. And he went out of his cabin, and there were these alien beings out there. And he was abducted. And similar to the Hills, he was also experimented upon and then brought back. And similar, his mind had been wiped out to a degree, but then he too went under hypnosis or so, and it came out to be. And then he wrote his landmark book, Communion, about the UFO experience and the alien abductee phenomenon. Whitley received a lot of ridicule throughout that time period. It was incredible. But it also resonated with a lot of people, and his book became a #1 bestseller because he detailed it in such a way like never before from the experiencer's perspective that was very meaningful, very gripping, very personal. And Whitley, being an author and a writer, a professional writer, has such a beautiful command of the English language that he's able to convey these experiences and some of the things that happened, that occurred, and some of the feelings that he had, which can be very difficult to express, to verbalize. He is able to do that, to make sense of it and make it understandable for those who are reading the material. So it became an absolute phenomenon, even to the point where he would be invited to different talk shows or so, and at times he would be, ridiculed, on some of these shows, for this experience or so. But one evening he was invited to attend a Tonight Show hosted by Johnny Carson. And he went, and that interview turned the tide, for Whitley and for this experience, because Johnny Carson was very open to this experience. He did not ridicule Whitley. He was very open. He asked very intelligent questions. He was very genuinely interested in the subject matter. He was very open-minded about it. So he gave respect and credibility to Whitley Strieber as his guest. They intellectually spoke about this experience. It was not ridiculed at all. People saw another viewpoint of this from that interview, and it turned the tide, for this experience to be spoken about with a sense of open-mindedness, curiosity, and respect. Whitley never forgot, that experience with Johnny Carson. He was always grateful to him for that. For it was one of the first times that he was in national television that he was, treated as a person who was sane, who knew what he was talking about, who was a well-educated individual, that was not a crackpot or some loon, but that is actually talking about a real experience and a traumatic experience and a serious subject, and that it was spoken about in that way with relevance. So that was never forgotten, and that really started to change the public view from there about this material and the entire subject matter of UFO, extraterrestrial, alien abduction. Whitley wrote 2 other books about the experience because it's such a vast experience. He wrote, it's a trilogy, of books. Breakthrough was the other book, and I forget the title of the third one. I have all 3 books. I've read all of them. It was fascinating, incredible, and I could relate with some of the things that Whitley stated because I was reading his experience, and because as a small child, and I've talked about this before in the past, I had experiences, from very small, from some sort of visits from some sort of beings or energies or entities. And as I read about Whitley's experience, even though his was different than mine, because first of all, he was an adult, And his experience was more extraterrestrial in a way, but at the same time, I was reading certain things about his experience and compared it to some of the things that I experienced. And some of the things were very much the same, identical actually. And I was just left with my mouth agape. I was in awe because he experienced certain things that I experienced in mine. I saw certain things that he saw as well. I had feelings and thoughts that I was never really able to speak about or verbalize because it was too difficult to do, at least for me. But he was able to verbalize those feelings and those thoughts. And as soon as I read that, I said, oh, this explains, this is the perfect explanation for what I had felt similarly or the same that he did in his experiences. So he was able to provide me explanation of how to verbalize this type of experience. And I didn't feel like, oh my God, this is really wasn't a figment of my imagination after all. It wasn't some childhood fantasy, either. He gave my experience, through his explanation and through his experience, credence. Something tangible. It was something solid to finally let me know that what I felt and what I experienced as well was true and was real at 100%. So all of these things can come together from different people in different ways. When the time is ready, that's when you receive, and that's when you know. This is, so be it from there. Of course, with Whitley Strieber, of course, he wrote many other numerous books since then. He's become very well known throughout the world. He attends lectures and events. He's been to universities, scientific symposiums. He's been to Roswell as well as one of the guest lecturers there. He's been on television. We've seen him a lot, on these various programs that, again, are part of this experience. Also, he's usually a featured and valuable, guest or commentator or contributor, to these experiences. He's become one of the world's leading experts on the alien abductee phenomenon and experience. I was lucky I was able to see Whitley once in person. He came to Manhattan years ago with his wife Ann Strieber, who was also a wonderful person, a brilliant intellectual as well. His partner in crime, we can say it that way, but Anne was always open and aware. She too experienced some things as well later on, also. And Anne, being the brilliant person as Whitley is, she wrote books on the subject matter material, and they are both brilliant and wonderful people. Whitley had written a book at that time. I was lucky to go to East West Books down in Manhattan and get to see them in person talking about, this type of, subject in the new book as well. I got to see them there. They were lovely, lovely. I saw that they had such a clean and good energy, about them. So it was very impressive for me to witness that, because I didn't really know what to expect. I'd heard about them for years and had seen the pictures and gone into Whitley's website, unknowncountry.com, which is still in existence, one of the best websites on this subject matter material out there. I recommend it highly. I'll post a link to that too later. Unknowncountry.com. He's the host of Dreamland, which is one of the first really internet programs of this kind, throughout the World Wide Web. So he's hosted that for many years. Dreamland. At one point, Art Bell had hosted it for a while too. William Henry, also another well-known person on this subject matter or so in ancient civilizations or so, has hosted too. Linda Moulton Howe, also has been a guest on this program. Many of the great luminaries of the New Age movement, have been on that program. Of course, Sylvia Browne had been a guest, as well. Many of these other people that we know about and seen on television now, they have been guests for many years, on Whitley's program. And so it is a fascinating program. I learned a lot from there, also. But I got to see the both of them in person, and I got to see what genuinely nice and good people, they were, how down to earth they were, how very sane and rational, they were, and how very pure and clear their energy and their aura, was. So that was a wonderful thing for me to see. And it gave a lot more confidence to me to know that my experiences or so, are fact. So again, they've gone through a lot of this. Unfortunately, Anne Strieber passed away several years ago from a brain tumor, but her energy and her essence are still with us, and still certainly with Whitley, as well. And he is not alone. And she makes sure that she knows, lets him know that he is not alone. He's able to connect with her. It's just a different form of relationship. So that is another incredible experience that occurred. We also have the Rendlesham forest UFO incident, known as Britain's Roswell. And that was another incredible experience that happened with the military at the Air Force Base. I do believe in 1980. It was December 22nd of 1980. Interesting that for both Whitley and for this experience in Britain, it occurred around Christmas time. Very interesting that would happen. This was 1980, so this is another decade, a new experience. And we had, the military there at the Air Force Base at that time known as Rendlesham, which is no longer active, that Air Force Base, but in the 1980s it was. And the soldiers in the military reported seeing lights and seeing craft over the forest. And they went to investigate. And there were strange lights, throughout there. And we have here then another person who became quite well known with this type of experience also, known as Colonel Charles I. Halt, come into view as in this experience as one of those people who actually had an event occur, along with some other military officers there as they went into the woods there, into the forest, to explore and see what happened, what is going on here. And they saw the lights, and they couldn't explain what was going on. And they were all on alert. And then they saw a mysterious craft before them. And it was in the form of a triangular shape, like diamond shape craft, hovering just about 6 feet off the ground, or maybe even less, emanating strange, like red and yellowish lights, from it. And it was right there, hovering there. It was silent. And they're looking at this, and they were wondering they couldn't believe what they were seeing. And they were reporting back and forth. So there's live audio of Colonel Halt reporting the actual experience back to the base of what he was seeing, what he was experiencing, what they were experiencing at that moment. And you can hear those tapes. I'm sure you can find them on the internet. I attended a lecture with Colonel Halt a few years ago as well. I've been very fortunate to be able to meet some of these people in person, throughout the years. So thanks to the Edgar Cayce Foundation, once again, when it was in Manhattan, in 30th Street. And again, the Intruders Foundation hosted various, speakers at times and events, and I was able to attend, this event through there, and with Colonel, Halt, being the guest speaker that evening. So I was able to hear him speak about what he experienced, and he provided some tape of the actual experience that occurred in 1980. There are shows that devoted to this program as well. You can also hear the live tapes on those programs. You can also find that over the internet as well if you're interested in hearing them for yourself. So he reported the craft as they saw it, and the lights, and what was there. There were some strange hieroglyphics on this craft as well. One of the soldiers approached the craft and got to see them and got to see it. And then the craft just took off, right in front of them, up into the trees, up into the sky, and vanished, gone, like is typical of these experiences. So we have military men with long careers, distinguished, respected, having these incredible experiences. And he, of course, has written books on the subject as well, and he's been a lecture circuit, also, and that's been examined and again looked out, as well. So that's another major experience, and it is known as the Roswell of Britain because of that particular type of experience where military got involved and military men got to see this happen right before them. And of course they were, as typical, asked to be silent, but in time, came out and revealed, also. You can find out more about those subjects as well, from there. So those are incredible experiences that have occurred regarding the extraterrestrial experience, all because going back to June 14th, 1947, in Roswell, New Mexico, of all places. Roswell at that time was just a small, obscure town in the middle of nowhere. And that a craft, for some reason, because, again, when it comes to the southwestern states, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, for some reason, the extraterrestrial experience seems to flourish, or they for some reason zoom into that region of the United States, or that region of the world, and thousands of people have experienced seeing beings, seeing craft, seeing the unexplained throughout those states or so. That area of the country is open to this. They migrate there for whatever reasons that we still don't know. Again, since that time period, we know that Nevada, especially Area 51, and now that we know that there's also an Area 52 as well, is government property. Groom Lake in Area 51, where they state that some of the extraterrestrial phenomenon and debris was taken, including some of the bodies, including the live alien who survived for a while, and they were able to converse telepathically with EB, as they call him, or J-Rod, as another one was called, also. They were kept there. They were able to converse with them there. They lived for a time until they passed on. The alien autopsies and things that occurred from the Roswell incident that were reported later on, the examination of those beings, the replica of those beings that were created to show us. If you ever go to Roswell, I recommend highly the UFO Museum. It's more than just a simple museum of curiosity with some interesting little things, to see or whatever. It is a serious, research center, and more than just a museum of curiosities and wonder. They have wonderful exhibits there, but they also have a lot of testimony from many people throughout the Roswell, town, going back to the 1940s when this first occurred, from the reporters, from the military people that later spoke. It is all detailed there and documented. I did a lot of research when I was there. I spent a lot of time there. They have a magnificent library there at the museum also. The place is quite large and quite extensive, more than I thought when I went there. Their museum is quite impressive. They have thousands of books, pamphlets, manuscripts, literature on the extraterrestrial, unidentified flying object, unidentified aerial phenomenon experience there, that people, scholars, can go to do work, research, discover, and just learn a great deal. I do believe that every book on this subject matter, or just about every book about this subject matter, can be located there. It was quite impressive. And many luminaries, researchers, scientists, or whatever, have been there to study and to learn and to connect. And they have, of course, their lectures, their events, there also. And also, I recommend highly, a visit there at some point in time. It's a lot more than you realize, there. But I did learn that this subject is far more deeper and more vast than what even the public media, describes to us. They're getting better at it now. They're providing more concrete fact and material, on the subject matter. But also, you will learn many, many people have seen things, there in that region. In fact, when I was at the museum one day, there was a family there who lived nearby, and I overheard, a lady saying to her, family there, yes, it's true. I've seen things as well from the sky that I can't be explained that are very much like this, that are similar to this. I've seen things, at some point in my life or so. So that was very encouraging to hear a person, a lay person, who was just a visitor, describe about, very briefly, that they too have experienced something unexplainable, something that they'd never seen before, happen right before their eyes. So it is a very fascinating subject, very interesting. As I said myself, I've had some sort of few experiences myself. In fact, about 2 or 3 years ago, on July the 4th, actually, one evening, I was, here, listening to the fireworks or so, watching the show, where I went out. I went to the garage for some reason, where my car is kept. I came back from there. I looked up into the sky, and I saw a light way, way up high there in the night. And it kind of had a greenish tint to it. I thought, that's interesting. So I said, that's very high up. How fascinating to see that greenish ball of light. But then I started noticing the greenish ball of light started moving upward in a straight line, moving upward, 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 straight line. Well, I'm staring at this. That's not an airplane, too high up. That's not a helicopter either, too high up also. It doesn't have the same look as a helicopter, no matter how far it is. I was looking at this thing, was stationary for quite some time, and then it starts moving upward, upward, upward in a straight line. Not wavering, just straight up, with a greenish tinge to it. And it just kept going up, and then it just disappeared. But it was extraordinarily high in the sky. I mean, higher than an airplane, certainly. Higher than any craft that I know of. And it wasn't moving so fast that it would be like an airplane or like a helicopter. They have to move at a certain speed. This was much slower and more relaxed. So when I saw this, I said, that was intriguing. So immediately I wrote my friend Mark. Now, my friend Mark Brinkerhoff is known as an alien contactee. And he is a lecturer on this subject matter. He's been connected with outworlders, extraterrestrial people or so, since he was a small child. And he's been able to connect with different forms of them. And he still retains contacts with them. They connect with him. He is a very well-regarded, researcher on this subject. He has taken numerous photographs of unidentified aerial phenomenon throughout his lifetime, because they come to him and they allow for this experience for him to do this. He has connections with them. He has been on their craft. He knows what this is about. So Mark Brinkerhoff, you can also, I'll post, a link to his website also, so you can find out more if you're interested about him. And he is a very well-respected lecturer and speaker on this subject, as well. I've known Mark for a very, very long time, and he's just marvelous, absolutely wonderful. And he, also has had incredible experiences, with this as well. So I wrote him immediately, and he wrote me back and said, yes, Dee, I understand. I have a friend of mine also who lives out in Long Island, who just a few minutes ago also wrote me much the same thing that you're writing me too. She's seeing them as well. She's seeing the green and also the orange. I didn't see the orange one, but I did see the greenish one. So that corroborated what I was seeing at that moment, and I gave him the time that I saw it, is when that it was outside, and he also confirmed that indeed, his other friend saw this at the same time as well. So we were seeing the same thing. And it's interesting we're connected with him. So that was fascinating for me to experience it, because I had wanted to see or experience something for a long, long time. And finally, out of nowhere, and on July 4th of all evenings, and no, it was not fireworks or whatever, because it was simply way too high in the sky. Around here, there weren't fireworks going like that either. And where I live, it's quite open. There's not that much light. I don't live in New York City itself. I live outside of the city. So we have big sky, over here. No obstructions of major tall buildings or so, or lights to obscure the view. And there were no fireworks, being fired at that time, and certainly not at that incredible height. So that kind of confirms some things for me, also. So I myself have had a few experiences as well, also, apparently. Not as concrete or as spectacular as some of these other individuals that I've talked about this evening have had, certainly, but something, as far as I know, anyway. Remember, they do, take memory away from you. However, about, at this point, what was it, 2004? So we're talking about, 15 years ago at this point or so? I did have an experience one evening here at home. I have written about this experience, and you can find it on my page, DeAngelis Colon, Transpsychic Express. I have written and I've provided this experience on my website. You can go into my page and go to the notes section, and you will find it there. I titled it May 26, 2004, The Night They Came. So you can find my story, there if you want to read about it more. I will briefly just cover it because it kind of touches upon our subject of this evening and my personal experience, with this to some extent. 2004 was a significant year because it was the year that my father passed away on March 26th, 2004. He passed away rather suddenly of a heart attack. He had been ill for quite some while, or so. He had had surgery before, 10 years before or so, or more, pertaining to his heart. He lived, all right, fortunately, after that. 14 years earlier, he had a minor stroke, but he recovered from that 14 years prior to that as well, 1990. Recovered, so he was quite well. He had to retire afterward, of course, but he was able to regain himself. He could drive, take care of himself. He spoke well. The stroke didn't fortunately leave him permanently damaged to that extent. But his heart was affected afterward. So towards the end there, so he was weakening already. And at the age of 76 and a half years, he passed away suddenly that evening on March 26, 2004. So, of course, that was a traumatic experience for my mother and for me, and we were just readjusting, getting to, our existence, then different. Things had changed. So my mother certainly was in recovery. They had been married 50 years, or actually 51 years. So that was a very traumatic event for my mother, obviously. And it was a big adjustment period for her. But we were getting through it, and we were here, and where we still live, now we've lived here forever. And we were adjusting to this new experience. And then one evening on May 26th of 2004, it was a very stormy night. It was a warm night as well. It was already, late spring at that point. And it was on a weekend, I do believe. And Mother was asleep in her room. I was asleep in my room. And I remember it was kind of a humid night, a very hot night. It was also a very stormy night. It was this tremendous lightning storm and thunderstorm that occurred that evening, to the point where it kind of woke me up. The thunder was so intense. I said, wow, that's really something else. And then I kind of went back to sleep. But then I started having some experiences in the dream state, as I call it. And it was like somebody was knocking on the door, the front door of our house, in the middle of the night, let's say at 3 o'clock in the morning or so. And I woke up. I could see myself waking up. In the dream state, it seemed, and my mother woke up as well, and we headed to the door. Mother went first. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, so who's knocking on the door? And then I started seeing things appear before us in this experience. And I saw these people that looked rather military in our home. And they were we're in the living room, dining room area. And then as we headed to our front door, which is adjacent to our kitchen, I saw 2 or 3 people in our kitchen who looked like military people, and they were almost trying to be almost intimidating, trying to prevent us from something. And there was a knock on the front door, and they were dressed in black and blue. There was one guy that had a crew cut, as they call it, and with his shirt and dark pants. There was a woman sitting at the small table, There's some sort of device or computer that she was monitoring for some reason. Similarly, they were dressed as professionals, like security. They looked like security. And the other one's way, they had this intimidating presence. And the door was knocking, and then I opened the door, and there was these tall, white individuals right in front of the door, just before us, like 3 or 4 of them. I said, who are you, and what is this? And, oh my God. And I was wondering, why am we not afraid of this? What's going on here? And then I said, well, I have to continue. And they were there for some reason. I opened the door. My mother opened the door. As I saw, the hallway was there, as typical. The long hallway. There are 3 more apartments down from where we are. And then the door in the middle of the hallway there was open. That is where our neighbor lives. My mother's very dear friend, lives in that apartment. At that time period, they were actually on vacation, so there was no one at home. But the door was open to their apartment. And I'm looking at this, oh my goodness, and my mother were looking at this, and then suddenly this being floats out from around the bend of the apartment in the corner and comes towards us, and it floats toward us. I can't even, it was incredible. And then another one. And then another one afterward. They floated. And they looked kind of dressed in pink, and they were kind of roundish, and they looked rather elephantine, for lack of a better way of expressing it to you. And they floated out of there, and they came to the entrance of our apartment, to the front door, and then they came in to the very front of the door. 1, 2, 3, 4. And who are these beings? Or they had these tall things on their head or whatever. And there was a good feeling about them. They seemed to be feminine in origin, but kind of elephantine. And then I noticed it, like one of them right there in the middle. It was smaller. But when I looked, I said, it was my grandmother, dressed as one of them. I said, oh my goodness, Mama, Mama, my mother's mother. I said, and Mama was there amongst these ladies dressed in this strange outfit, in a strange way, and they were very spiritual-like beings. And my mother saw her, said, oh, Mama, her mother, and they greeted each other, and they embraced right there. So, oh my God, I felt so happy. We felt so happy, because my grandmother had passed away years before, 1992. Actually, the very last day of the year, December 31st, 1992, my grandmother passed away at the age of 94 or 96 or so. And so this was years later, and she came. And then from there, I awoke. And oh my goodness, what a glorious experience. Oh my God, it was incredible. I recognized, it was like I was half asleep and half awake. Anyway, I went back to sleep, and I was very happy. I knew that my grandmother, had come to visit my mother, because it was such a traumatic time for my mother, being a widow, and my father recently passing exactly 2 months before the day of this experience, which was incredible to me. But now it gets more interesting. And we're going a little bit off time, but that's okay, because we're going to conclude with this. This is fascinating. I went back to sleep. The storm had subsided. I was very happy. But then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, like around 4 in the morning or so, someone started banging on the front door. And then I awoke. And then this time it wasn't in the dream state. This was actually happening here and now. I awoke. And it was like, oh my God, there's banging on the door. And then my mother woke up as well. And then similar to my previous experience just before, my mother went before, I went behind her, because they were knocking on the door. It was at 4 or something in the morning. And my mother asked, who is it? It was the police. At this time, I was still kind of like, okay, I was still processing in a way somewhat, but I wasn't making the connection what happened before, just a little while before. So my mother opened the door. I opened the door behind her. And sure enough, she looked at the peephole. There were 2 police officers and then 2 of our neighbors standing alongside. So we opened the door, and sure enough, there were 2 police officers standing on either side. Our neighbor, Mr. DeMeo, from the 6th floor, and our other neighbor, Michael, from the 6th floor as well, standing alongside the other police officer. And they said, ma'am, Ma'am, excuse us this evening, but it was reported that there was some noise happening, here, and that people heard screams. And Michael and Mr. DeMeo apparently called the police because they heard screams. They said, they reported that there were screams coming from here, from the fifth floor, and from here, from your apartment. I said, no, nothing at all. We're fine. We were fast asleep. We were asleep. I said, everything is fine. Everything is fine. And we were. We were fine. And Michael was looking. He was worried about us. And where's Mr. DeMeo? They were, are you, okay, you're fine? Everything is fine. We're fine. I said, we're absolutely fine. I said, okay. I said, well, that's good. We're glad. We're so sorry to disturb you. But we got the report and we heard, and there was some noises going about, as well. Also, apparently on the roof as well, too, that they heard noises from the roof, also. Mr. DeMeo and and Michael lived on the sixth floor, which is the top floor, and above them is the roof of our building. At that time, there was just the stairway going up to the roof. And, so they heard some noises as well, up there. So, and then they heard the screaming apparently from our apartment or from the fifth floor or so, and they came to us, but only to us. They didn't go to any other apartment. So they were certain that something was going on here with screaming. But we were fine. We were perfectly fine. So, well, thank you so much. We're glad that you're okay, and please, forgive us for interrupting you. So, no, everybody's fine. And Michael was there, and Mr. DeMeo with it. They were fine as well, luckily. And that was it. And off we went. So, oh my God, what could be? What could happen? Anyway, the next day, we heard more, from them. My mother went out, or some. Well, apparently there was some noise on the roof, and heard some running on the roof. At 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning or so, and there was some commotion going on. And when they went up there, they saw nothing. There was nothing there. I said, well, that's interesting. And the peculiar thing was that the door was open when they got up there. And the even more unusual thing was that that door had been rigged with an alarm system, because prior to that time period, this is 2004 or so, in the early 2000s, there was some reports about people hanging out on the roof of our building. And there was some drug paraphernalia. At that time, we had some young people that were, at that time, that is no longer the case. But at that time period, we had some young people hanging out up there and smoking or whatever, or using stuff or whatever, and leaving stuff up there and hanging it up there. And there were reports of the noise and sound or whatever. So in order to prevent that, they installed an alarm at the door, and if you opened it, it would set off the alarm, and then the door would close behind you. So if you're on the roof, the wonderful thing was that if you tried to get out, that door automatically locked. You were not able to get out of there. You were not able to escape. So you were going to be caught. But that evening, the police discovered the door wide open. The alarm did not go off like it's supposed to. It was electronically placed to do. Not a sound, but the door was open. And no one was up there. And it's the same night of the experience that I just told you about. That was incredible. Absolutely incredible. So, was it a visitation? Did they come down and land on the roof and then come down this way? Did we experience something that we didn't really remember? Were we terrified that people heard screaming at 4 in the morning or so, to the point where the police came to check on us in our apartment? A little while afterward, where the neighbors came down as well to make sure that we were okay. And that I had that incredible experience just before all of that happened, similar, with the door and hearing the door, knocking, and my mother and me heading to it and dressed in the same way. Something to think about. Something incredible. Something with no explanation. But that's what happened there with me. So, fascinating things happen. There are things that can't be explained. Events, people, beings that leave us wondering what's going on, what's happening. Leaves you wondering, is it real or is it a dream or a figment of the imagination? And then it may take time to unravel that and to find out and to see what is fiction and what is reality. It relates with the extraterrestrial, with the unidentified, with the unusual. Many things happen on this world. There are many unexplainable experiences, and more are happening as we see. More and more people are talking about this. They're no longer as afraid as they used to be. People from different areas of the world, different ages, different cultures, different backgrounds, different belief systems, people who are completely skeptical to all of this, who are not religious, not spiritual, don't believe in anything of this kind whatsoever. They think it's pure fantasy or mental illness until it happens to them. Some people have been traumatized, others have been not affected so much from it. Some people believe, some people continue to think that this is not real, it's insane. They've been affected, some have not. Some people, unfortunately, have been driven to seek help and have been driven to even clinics or so because of certain experiences of this nature happening to them. Others have opened up and realized and embraced the experience. Others have gained increases in their abilities, in their knowledge, in their energies. Many people experience many things. We can go back to government times, as well back to the 1950s, once again, when the Roswell incident occurred. And we can go to the time where President Dwight D. Eisenhower, was president when all of this started happening as well. President Roosevelt, not so much because that was the war period and he had passed away. But President Truman, during the Roswell experience, and his not wanting to discuss this thing so much or revealing if there was anything there, he was going to close up. The military and the government were going to close up. They had to keep secrets, and they still do. President Eisenhower, as a former general during World War II, who succeeded President Truman, dealt with this, even though it was secretive. His vice president was Richard Nixon. And they had a few experiences that they couldn't talk about, as well couldn't reveal. We understand that alien visitations came during the 1950s or so when Eisenhower was president, and that they had visitors and they had connections and they had meetings. That cannot really be fully revealed. You can find information about that in the websites as well. There are many. President Dwight D. Eisenhower's great-granddaughter, Laura Eisenhower, is a respected lecturer, astrologer, astrologist, and speaker. Laura is someone who has spoken about this type of thing as well, about her great-grandfather's experience. She's alluded to the fact that people in the family have spoken about this subject pertaining to the extraterrestrial and the visitors and whatever that had come in the past from time to time, but not in a very big way. She's the only one in the family that is the more spiritually open to these things or so. And you can find her also on the internet. She has a new podcast as well that you can look into, Laura Eisenhower. And she is a lecturer and speaker and event of holistic wellness, an astrologer, as well also. And she has spoken from time to time about the extraterrestrial experience and relating to her grandfather, the government, also. So you can find out more, about that. We have the time period where the experience of the extraterrestrial person known as Valiant Thor came into being. I do believe it was 1955 or so. And Valiant Thor was someone who came on March 15th, if I remember, or so, I think 1953, 55 or so, whatever, and came upon the Earth, and the military were there because there was a craft and whatever, and they greeted him and they came to see him. And Valiant Thor said that he was from Venus, or the dimension of Venus. And I know this gets very, very interesting, doesn't it? It gets almost, I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. But there's a lot of information about this experience also during the 50s with this Venetian being called Valiant Thor. And he had wanted an audience with the president. And he was granted that, and they escorted him to the White House. And he met with President Eisenhower and with Vice President Nixon, and all about these things with the craft or so, and the others that came with him as well. And he stayed here in the United States and in Washington actually for 3 years. And he came to talk about the connections and to see about establishing a connection between his people and those here of the earth. And he spoke a lot about what had to be done to make this world better, and about peace, and about abolishing nuclear weapons and systems of that sort, and about how humans could live at peace and humanity. And he was in the government, and he was in the White House apparently. He stayed here for 3 years. And then his time came after the third year, March 15th of, I guess, 3 years later. And that was his end of his time period. But there was nothing that could be negotiated at that time because peace couldn't be established the way he had advised. The governments were too entrenched in their ways, and they couldn't get away from those things. There was the threat of war, the threat of violence in the world. They just couldn't agree to these things. So unfortunately, there was never a connection to be established with others from another world or so from that time period. Valiant Thor left as well. There were other people that accompanied him as well that looked very humanoid. And they came about for a time and others knew them. And there are pictures in the internet you can search. It's a little interesting, it's a little vague, as well with that story. But Laura Eisenhower, I do believe, has touched upon this at some point and corroborated certain things that this is factual to an extent or so. And the craft that Valiant Thor, or Val as he was known, it came upon was a very gigantic and vast vessel. And it landed apparently in Utah, upon a lake, Lake Mead in Utah. And that is, of course, it's invisible because they vibrate in a different way and they're able to do that. And it was there for a while. And apparently, for what I understand, the craft is still there in a section of Lake Mead. And there's a section there, you cannot see it, but it is there. These beings last and live for hundreds of years. So their lives are very, very long and very vast. And apparently they are still there. And who knows, they may not have the same connection as far as we know with the government, but they're still there. There hasn't been more elaborated upon that. But they are still among us apparently in some form. And who else is among us as well, also. So at this point I've gone a little bit over time. Obviously we're 2 hours. Interesting subject matter, but we're going to come to a conclusion here. But I wanted to give you as much information and material as possible, so things for you to learn, things for you to know, a little bit of details as well, some fascinating people, incredible experiences, some that are historic, that are well known, others that have more details that you don't know about. There are many other incidents that have occurred, also, about these things. Perhaps in the future I'll do another program on this subject matter, so we could talk about other experiences that have happened, with this as well. There are other things, also relating to this. We also have, for instance, the Bigfoot phenomenon as well, Sasquatch, that relates with the extraterrestrial experience as well. We have also cryptids that are becoming more known now to the public, view lately. There are more programs devoted to that, as well. So we have things besides Sasquatch. We have, Mantis Man, the insectoid being that has been spotted in the woods sections or so. We have the werewolves, especially in the Virginia area, in the forest there, and that people have experienced, also, and other interesting beings of this sort that somehow relate with the extraterrestrial experience, because people have seen extraterrestrial craft, lights or so, in relation to Sasquatch, to Bigfoot, or to these other cryptid beings that I mentioned to you at the same time, or similar, with certain experiences. Not with all, but certain experiences. So they seem to relate, also. So we can touch upon that area of this phenomenon, as I would call it, as well. And then the other things, the military, the government, there's more there. Project Blue Book, of course, that I mentioned earlier, but there were other projects before. Project Grilled Flame, also. There's a wonderful book by W.M. Mandelbaum, who used to work in government. It's called The Psychic Battlefield. And he talks a lot about the military-industrial complex, relating to things of this nature also in part, but more towards remote viewing. And what W. Adam Mandelbaum would speak was more about remote viewing and how the military engaged with that to be able to use psychic abilities to spy on other countries and enemies or so. And it also relates to psychic ability because Adam is also a psychic as well. So he has a fascinating book, also Psychic Battlefield, it's called. And that can relate with this experience as well, because there are things that happen. They're psychics, telepathy or so relates heavily with the UFO, the unidentified flying object experience. It happens everywhere throughout the world. Before I conclude, we also have look into South America, because there's a vast amount of information on this subject as well. The legendary UFO researcher Jaime Maussan, who's one of the world's leading researchers on this subject, certainly South America's number one UFO researcher, UFOologist, has had numerous books, lectures, material written on this subject. He's researched this for decades, also. And you can find out a lot about the South American portion of UFO and extraterrestrial experience, through him. And there are others there in South America as well. They have incredible videos. In some cases, even that far surpass in quality, the ones here from the United States, of craft that they've captured, beings or so in some way. Absolutely incredible, and quite, respectable as well too. And Jaime Maussan is a very respected, scientific reporter, researcher on this subject as well. And we've had UFOs all over the world. At one point, I don't know if it still is, but they were saying the highest amount of unidentified flying objects that have been observed, period, by people, throughout the world entirely, the one area that has the highest amount of actual viewing of such a phenomenon is Israel, Jerusalem. There have been countless amounts of people seeing, extraterrestrial craft, lights in the sky that can't be explained. High up. Typical, unusual, the typical cigar-shaped thing, the typical saucer craft, lights that appear out of nowhere, incredible things. Of all places, the Holy Land has been the number one place in the earth that has witness of UFO, unidentified flying objects, and extraterrestrial activity. Isn't that incredible? They don't talk so much about that there, but I have seen evidence of that from time to time. That's something also to learn more about as well. As I said, we could go on and on and on. The subject is incredibly vast, but I do hope that you found this interesting as usual. You learned something different, something new. It's opened your mind, to this area of phenomenon, of metaphysical phenomenon or so. And see what else you'll find. I'll post a few links, later on at the end of the program. So with that, I'm going to wish all of you a big thank you, first of all, for being here with me this evening. And again, open your minds, explore. The world and the universe has wonders that we can only begin to imagine. So, do have a wonderful 4th of July, a wonderful, happy 4th of July weekend. Enjoy every moment of it. So much more out there. And we will be back next week, and I'll announce when I'll do the program, and we'll probably, get back to doing some readings, next week at that point. And some other things. I have a lot of things in my mind to do programming. So we'll do some spot readings and some other fascinating subjects and material as well throughout the summer. I have some interesting things to present to you this summer. This was just the first of it, okay? So, blessings to you as always. Thank you for your patience, and enjoy the rest of the weekend and the week. Everybody, sleep well, be beautiful, wonderful dreams, and good night to you always. Happy 4th of July. Take care. Bye-bye.